Hi there, I'm Lorraine, and this is the story of how my own mother and sister turned their backs on me, starting with the birthday they chose to forget. What seemed like small slights built up into something much crueler, something that would leave me fighting just to be seen, just to belong. How does a family abandon one of their own so easily? Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever felt invisible at your own family's table? The evening air was thick with the slow humidity that clung to Charleston like an old sweater no one wanted to put away. I stood in front of my mirror, brushing imaginary lint from the dress I had chosen carefully. The one that wasn't too flashy, but still said, "Today is important." The house hummed with the low murmur of TV noise, the clinking of silverware in the kitchen. Normal sounds. Nothing special. But it was early yet. Maybe they were planning something. I stepped quietly down the stairs, heart lifting with every cautious step. Maybe Candace and Mom were setting up in the dining room. Maybe a cake, maybe balloons. Something small but thoughtful. I rounded the corner into the living room and stopped. Mom and Candace were on the couch, flipping through a catalog, laughter bubbling between them like champagne. "I think the blue one would look better on you for the gala," Mom said, pointing. "No way. The red will pop so much more," Candace answered, eyes bright. They didn't even glance up at me. I hovered, hoping, waiting. Candace's voice drifted over. "We have to head to the mall tomorrow. Need to get it early before the sizes run out." Mom nodded, already planning the trip aloud, shopping for Candace's work event. Not a word about today. I turned back toward the kitchen, the pit in my stomach swelling until it nearly blocked my breath. Maybe they forgot because they were busy. Maybe they would remember later. Maybe there was a surprise upstairs or hidden in the car. Maybe. I rummaged through the pantry, finding a forgotten box of cake mix, a half-used tub of frosting pushed to the back of the fridge. I mixed, baked, decorated in silence, my hands moving through motions that felt disjointed, mechanical. By the time the cupcake was ready, the sky outside had melted into dusky lavender, the street lamps flickering to life. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the single lopsided cupcake. No candles, no presents, no cards. Just me. Just Lorraine, the background character in her own life. I lit a match, stuck it in the cupcake like a makeshift candle, and watched the tiny flame tremble. I closed my eyes and made a wish that I wouldn't remember this feeling next year. Hours dragged by. The house grew quieter, the distant sound of Mom and Candace's laughter replaced by the thuds of doors closing, faucets running, televisions humming softly in their rooms. I stayed downstairs, waiting without admitting it to myself. At 11:57 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Happy birthday, sorry we're busy, hope you understand." I stared at the screen, the words blurring. There was no knock at my door, no hug goodnight, no awkward singing. Just that. An obligation fulfilled with the least effort possible. I set the phone face down on the table. The match had long since burned out, leaving the cupcake in shadow. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just sat there, feeling like a faded photograph pinned to the fridge door, curling at the edges from being forgotten too long. In the heavy stillness, memories unspooled. Bright flashes of childhood birthdays with messy cakes, gleeful shouts, wrapping paper flying. I had been loved once, or at least it had seemed so. Somewhere along the line, the color had leached out of those memories, leaving only the ache behind. I blew out the makeshift candle, wishing not for gifts or parties anymore. I wished for something smaller, more impossible, to be seen, truly seen. But I knew deep down that tonight was a beginning and an ending all at once. Next year, maybe, I wouldn't be here. Next year, maybe, I would be somewhere they couldn't forget me, or maybe somewhere I wouldn't have to care. Morning light spilled across the kitchen table, soft and forgiving, touching everything but the mood hanging thick in the air. I hummed to myself, filling my travel mug with coffee, mind drifting toward the paper due next week. Spring in Charleston always had a way of making even heavy things feel lighter, and for a fleeting moment, it almost worked. Then Mom's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Where's my money, Lorraine?" I turned, confused, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim of my mug. Marilyn stood at the counter, rifling through her purse with increasing agitation, each movement sharper than the last. "What money?" I asked, blinking, still half in the dream of an ordinary morning. "The $50 that was in here," she snapped, holding the purse up like it was Exhibit A. "Don't play dumb." The world shifted, the floor tilting ever so slightly beneath me. I set my mug down carefully, hands suddenly too large, too clumsy. "I didn't take anything," I said, the words tasting foreign in my mouth. Candace entered the kitchen, phone in hand, pausing just long enough to take in the scene. Her gaze slid over me, unreadable, before she leaned casually against the doorway. Mom didn't even acknowledge my denial. She turned to Candace instead. "You were here. Did you see her near my purse?" Candace shrugged, her eyes flickering toward me for a heartbeat too long. Then she looked away. "I didn't see anything," she said lightly, voice lilting in a way that was meant to sound innocent. It didn't. The accusation hung there, thick and sour, with no defense strong enough to cut through it. I could feel myself shrinking, folding in on myself, my voice lodged somewhere deep I couldn't reach. "Maybe check your car," I offered weakly. Mom gave a sharp laugh, humorless and hard. "Of course you'd say that." There was no space left to argue, no room for my truth to live in that kitchen anymore. Only verdicts handed down without trial. I sat through breakfast in silence, pushing scrambled eggs around my plate without eating. Candace chatted about her upcoming trip to New York, her tone breezy, as if nothing were wrong, as if I were invisible. Later that afternoon, when I went up to my room, I found the missing $50 tucked neatly between the pages of my textbook, a place I would never have put it. I stared at the crisp bill, heart hammering against my ribs. A joke, then? A trap? Either way, the message was clear. In this house, guilt was not something you earned. It was something assigned. That evening, as we lounged in the living room, Candace threw a glance my way and smirked. "Careful where you hide your treasures, Lore," she teased, the words slipping under the skin like barbed wire. "Never know when they'll find their way into the wrong hands." The room laughed, not cruelly, not overtly, just enough to let me know I was the joke no one cared to explain. I smiled, brittle and tight, feeling the walls close in. Later, alone with only the hum of the air conditioning for company, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. The pen trembled in my hand for a moment before I wrote, "Sometimes the real theft isn't of money, it's of dignity." I closed the journal, clicking the lock with a small, decisive snap. "Next time," I whispered to the empty room, "I'll be ready." Thanksgiving had always carried a heavy kind of expectation in our family. A day meant for gratitude, for gathering, for filling the house with the scent of roasted turkey and buttery rolls. As I walked up the driveway, the late afternoon sun dipped low, painting everything in a soft golden light that somehow made the edges of my loneliness sharper, not softer. Inside, the house buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and music a touch too loud. Candace floated between groups, dazzling in a crimson dress, her smile as polished as the silverware gleaming on the long, beautifully set table. I shrugged off my jacket, smoothing down my skirt, telling myself that today, maybe today, would be different. The place cards were laid out carefully on the formal dining table, each name handwritten in Mom's meticulous cursive. I smiled faintly, scanning the seats, but my name wasn't there. I moved around the table again, slower this time, my stomach tightening. In the adjoining room, where the smaller, brightly colored kids' table stood, I found it. My name, wedged between my 7-year-old cousin and a high chair reserved for a toddler. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, brittle and disbelieving. Surely this was a mistake. Surely. I glanced toward Mom, who caught my eye and, without missing a beat, waved her hand dismissively, turning back to her conversation with an uncle I barely knew. Like I was an afterthought. Like it didn't matter. I slid into the tiny chair, knees crammed awkwardly beneath the short table, pretending not to notice the glances, the whispering from the adult table. I could feel their pity burning against my skin, or worse, their indifference. Candace sashayed past me, drink in hand, and leaned down just enough to murmur, "You always did fit better here," before flashing a bright, cruel smile and gliding away. I forced a laugh, forced a sip of water, forced my face into something resembling normal. Halfway through dinner, I finally worked up the courage to joke, to try to smooth over the jaggedness carving itself deeper into my chest. Someone must have mixed up the seating charts, I said lightly, hoping to diffuse the weight pressing down on me. Mom barely glanced up from her plate. You have to earn your seat at the adult table, dear. The words struck sharper than any slap. Conversation around the room didn't pause, didn't stutter. No one seemed to notice that something inside me cracked so sharply it echoed between my ribs. I stared down at my plate, the food blurring into a mush of color I couldn't distinguish. My appetite evaporated, replaced by a hollow ache that felt frighteningly familiar. I thought back to all the times I'd been set aside, school plays missed, awards left unacknowledged, birthdays that faded into ordinary days. A seat at the table had never really been mine. I'd only borrowed it, foolish enough to believe I belonged. Dinner dragged on, a slow parade of toasts and shared memories I was not a part of. Every clink of glass, every burst of laughter was a fresh cut. When dessert arrived, Candace rose, glass in hand, and called for a toast. To family loyalty, she said, voice ringing clear through the room, smug and self-satisfied. I watched the adults raise their glasses, watched the warmth pass between them, a current I would never tap into. Under my breath, barely audible above the clatter of forks and chatter, I whispered, family is loyalty, until you're inconvenient. The sun poured into the kitchen that Saturday, making everything look softer than it really was. I sat at the table, flipping through the pages of a worn textbook, pretending not to notice the hurried conversations between Mom and Candace. Their voices were low, excited, filled with that particular energy that meant something special was happening, something I hadn't been invited into. Candace's laughter floated down the hallway, and I caught snippets. New luggage, passport renewals, shopping for European weather. Europe. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe they hadn't gotten around to telling me yet, that maybe they were planning to surprise me, to make up for everything that had weighed heavy on my heart lately. But when Candace mentioned the trip casually to a family friend over the phone, rattling off dates and destinations without my name once crossing her lips, the hope I had stitched together in secret came apart at the seams. They had planned it without me. I waited until dinner to bring it up, hoping, praying, begging some part of the universe that I had misunderstood. So, I said, picking at my salad, I heard something about a trip? Mom didn't even blink. Oh, that. We didn't want to bother you, honey. You're so busy with your little life. Little life. The words landed heavier than any slap could have. I forced a smile, swallowing the humiliation down with a gulp of water. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg for inclusion. I just nodded, the way you nod when you realize that you were never really part of the picture at all. A week later, while scrolling through Facebook in the quiet of my room, the photographs found me. Mom and Candace, laughing in front of the Eiffel Tower. Mom and Candace, posing under the cherry blossoms in a Prague square. Mom and Candace, smiling wide at a vineyard in Tuscany. Not a single word sent to me, not a text, not a photo, not a note saying, wish you were here. Because they didn't, and maybe I realized they never had. The bitterness pooled deep, not burning hot like anger, but settling heavy and cold, like stones in the pit of my stomach. I closed the app and stared at the ceiling, feeling the full weight of everything I had ignored, excused, forgiven for far too long. The truth was, I wasn't the missing piece of their puzzle. I was the leftover scrap they didn't know what to do with. That night, I pulled out the box of old family photos hidden under my bed. Birthday parties where I stood off to the side. School plays where my smile strained to reach my eyes. Vacations where my presence had always been blurred, an afterthought in the frame. One by one, I fed them into the trash bag, not in anger, but in quiet resignation. I wasn't erasing my past. I was accepting it for what it had always been, a story where I was never meant to be the hero. As I deleted the last folder from my laptop, I whispered into the stillness of my room. Maybe it's time I booked my own one-way ticket. Sundays used to be my favorite. Lazy afternoons where family friends would gather in our backyard, laughter and barbecue smoke twisting into the warm Charleston breeze. But not this Sunday. This Sunday carried a different weight, invisible but suffocating. I noticed it first in the way conversations would quiet when I entered the room, in the half-smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes, in the way old family friends pulled their children just a little closer when I passed by. I pretended not to notice. I grabbed a lemonade from the cooler, sat on the edge of the porch swing, and forced myself to sway slowly, hoping the motion would soothe the knot forming in my chest. It was a neighbor, Mrs. Halverson, who let it slip. "I just hope Lorraine's situation doesn't become a bigger issue," she murmured to another woman, words floating on the humid air. Situation. I didn't have a situation, or at least I didn't until that moment, when the earth shifted slightly beneath me. I caught bits and pieces, words like inappropriate, embarrassment, shame. None of it tied to anything real, but none of it needing to be. The damage was already done. I searched the crowd for my mother, for Candace. Surely they would defend me. Surely they would tell everyone the truth, that there was no truth to tell. But Mom avoided my gaze entirely, busying herself at the grill. Candace laughed a little too loudly at a joke I hadn't heard. I wanted to believe they didn't know. I needed to believe they didn't know. But deep down I understood. When I finally gathered the courage to ask later, when the guests had thinned and the sun had dipped low enough to cast long slanted shadows across the yard, Mom barely looked at me. "You should know," she said, voice clipped, cold. I stood there, swallowing down the rising bile as she turned her back and disappeared into the house. That night, through the thin walls, I overheard the meeting. Marilyn and Candace, low-voiced but urgent. "We have to protect our family name," Mom insisted. "She's always been different," Candace added, a note of satisfaction beneath the false concern. They weren't debating. They weren't questioning. They were deciding. Deciding how to slowly, quietly cut me out, like an infected branch they didn't want to acknowledge had ever been part of the tree. It wasn't the loss of their approval that gutted me. It was the realization that they had never cared enough to doubt the whispers, even for a second. I spent that night sitting cross-legged on the floor of my room, pen poised over a sheet of paper for what felt like hours. I tried to write everything I wished they would ask, everything I wished they would care enough to hear. But somewhere between the first line and the second, I understood. They didn't want my side of the story. They never had. They just wanted me gone without the inconvenience of guilt. I carried the letter out to the backyard, lit a match with trembling fingers, and watched as the flames devoured every word, every plea, every remnant of a bond that had never truly existed. Ashes scattered into the night sky, floating higher than I ever could. As I watched them disappear, I whispered to the stars, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been in weeks. "Maybe it's time to disappear before they erase me completely." The message came just after sunset, short and sharp like everything else lately. "Come home, now." No explanation, no warmth, just another order disguised as a request. I almost didn't go. I almost let the words sit there and rot the way they deserved. But some stubborn broken part of me still obeyed, still hoped for something that wasn't cruelty. The house loomed dark when I arrived, porch light flickering, the way it always had when the bulb was overdue for replacement. I pushed the door open and stepped into a wall of silence so heavy it made the air thick in my lungs. They were waiting for me. Marilyn sat rigid on the arm of the sofa, arms crossed, face carved from stone. Candace perched nearby, legs crossed elegantly, a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth like she already knew the ending. No one offered a seat. No one smiled. "We need to talk about what you've done," Marilyn said, voice low and shaking not with sadness but with fury. "What I've done?" My voice came out too small. "You've humiliated this family," Candace chimed in, words honeyed but dripping with venom. I stood there, backpack still slung over one shoulder, staring at them, the scene feeling surreal, like stepping into a nightmare I didn't remember falling asleep to. Their accusations blurred together, reckless, selfish, shameful. No evidence, no specifics. Just a list of sins I'd never committed, convictions written before I opened my mouth. I started, But Marilyn was already standing, finger pointed at my chest. Enough! The word cracked through the room like a whip. She shoved me backward, not hard enough to knock me down, but enough to make it clear. You are nothing here. Candace's smirk widened. She watched, arms folded, as if she were enjoying the show. I caught my balance, cheeks burning. I wanted to scream, to fight, to make them see, but I knew, somewhere deeper than words, that nothing I said would matter. It never had. Candace rose, crossed the room in 3 sharp steps, and grabbed the backpack from my shoulder. She yanked open the hall closet, dragging out 2 garbage bags stuffed haphazardly with my things. Shoes, books, clothes, all crumpled together without care. She tossed them through the open door onto the front porch like they were trash. "You're not welcome here anymore," Marilyn said, her voice so final it left no air for argument. "Don't ever come back." The porch light flickered again. I stood frozen, heart hammering so hard I thought I might be sick. Candace pushed the door wider, gesturing mockingly. "Go on," she said sweetly, like a cashier dismissing a customer who had overstayed their welcome. "Before you embarrass yourself even more." The cold air hit me first when I stepped outside, then the finality. The door slammed shut behind me, the lock clicking like the snap of a mousetrap. I stood there under the dim yellow bulb, looking down at the pieces of my life stuffed into black plastic. This house, this family, had been my whole world once. I had dreamed under this roof, cried into these walls, believed in these people, and now they had spit me out like something foul. I picked up the bags, hands trembling but not from the weight. No tears came. The part of me that could cry for them had already been burned to ash. I didn't look back. The cracked sidewalk stretched ahead of me, endless and empty, the streetlights flickering like dying stars. I walked into the night, each step peeling away another layer of who I used to be. Home is just another place where I was never wanted. Charleston at night was a different kind of cold. It wasn't the bite of winter air, but the hollow chill that settled deep in your chest when you realized you had nowhere left to go. I dragged the garbage bags down an alley slick with rain, my sneakers soaked through, my fingers numb from clutching plastic handles that cut into my palms. Each step echoed in the silence, a hollow tap that reminded me just how invisible I had become. I tried not to think about the living room, the shouts, the accusations, the moment Marilyn's hand shoved me backward and Candace's sneer watched me crumble. I tried not to see the way my belongings had landed in a pathetic heap on the porch like discarded junk. But the images played behind my eyes anyway, cruel and relentless. I wasn't just thrown out. I had been erased. The future I once dreamed about, college graduation, a small apartment, maybe even a life worth building, had been ripped away in a single night by the people I had trusted most. Now all I had were 2 garbage bags and a bruised rib that ached every time I drew a breath. I wandered the streets, searching for a place that felt less threatening than the others. The public library was closed. The bus station swarmed with shadows that shifted and murmured things I didn't want to understand. An abandoned park offered a bench hidden by sagging oak trees, and it was there that I collapsed, pulling my knees up to my chest as if I could fold myself small enough to disappear. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise sharpened my nerves to glass. Every passing car made my heart stutter with fear. Every gust of wind reminded me I was utterly, completely alone. The nights bled into days, then blurred back into nights again. I scavenged what little I could, half-eaten sandwiches from trash cans behind diners, bottles of water left forgotten on park benches. Hunger gnawed at my insides, a dull roar that eventually faded into a kind of constant ache, just another part of the background noise. I learned how to avoid the familiar streets, where neighbors might recognize me and pretend not to. I became a ghost moving through the edges of the city, careful not to leave footprints behind. There were moments, rare and fleeting, where I caught my reflection in a store window or a puddle and didn't recognize the hollow-eyed girl staring back at me. Was this who I had always been, beneath the polished veneer of good grades and polite smiles? Had they seen it all along, this nothingness, and just waited for me to realize it too? One night, I found myself standing on a bridge just outside the city, the water below black and endless. I rested my hands on the cold iron railing, the breeze tugging at my sleeves, whispering things I didn't want to hear. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just stood there, feeling the weight of nothing pressing down on me, heavier than any burden I had ever carried. The thought came gently, almost kindly. If no one even notices when you're gone, did you ever really exist? I closed my eyes, letting the question settle into my bones, letting it hollow me out until there was almost nothing left. Almost. The bookstore smelled like old dreams and second chances, a mix of aging paper, dust, and something warm that clung to the wooden floors like a memory. I stepped inside hesitantly, the bell above the door giving a soft chime that felt too loud against the quiet hum of the space. I hadn't planned to come here. I hadn't planned anything since that night on the bridge when the city seemed ready to swallow me whole. But my feet had found their way to this place, like they knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I drifted through the narrow aisles, running my fingers lightly along the spines of books worn smooth by other hands. No one stared, no one asked questions. That was when I bumped into her, Morgan Lee. She wasn't polished like Candace or sharp like Mom. She was soft edges and easy smiles, a worn sweater in human form. "Looking for something special?" she asked, voice gentle enough that it didn't scrape against the raw places inside me. I shook my head, ready to move away, but she didn't press. She just smiled and pointed toward a small display of poetry books near the window. "Sometimes the right words find you when you're not even looking," she said, then turned back to reshelving a stack of novels without another glance. Something cracked open quietly in my chest. For the first time in months, maybe longer, someone had seen me without asking to hold my pain in their hands. Someone had let me exist without expecting anything back. Later, as I thumbed through a battered copy of poems about rivers and roots, Morgan reappeared at my elbow. "There's a coffee shop next door," she said casually. "No pressure, but I was heading over if you want to join." I almost said no. The word was right there, heavy on my tongue, instinct born of too many betrayals. But something lighter, something reckless and starved, broke free instead. "Okay," I whispered. We sat outside with steaming mugs, the late afternoon sun dipping low enough to catch the edges of Morgan's hair and turn it gold. We didn't talk about anything deep, no probing questions, no sympathetic looks, just two people existing in the same space without expectation. It was terrifying, and it was beautiful. That night, when I finally charged the old phone buried at the bottom of my bag, it exploded with notifications, calls, voicemails, texts, from Marilyn, from Candace. I scrolled through with a numb thumb, each message bleeding into the next. "We're sorry. Please come home. We need you." My chest tightened, the old longing roaring back to life, hot and sharp. My hands trembled as I read the last text. "We're sorry. Please come back. We need to talk." I sat there on the floor of the tiny room I had found above the bookstore, phone heavy in my palm, heart heavier still. Part of me, the part that still ached like an open wound, wanted to run back, wanted to believe in apologies, in redemption, in family. But another part, quieter but stronger now, remembered. Remembered garbage bags and slammed doors, remembered whispers and sidelong glances, remembered a birthday celebrated alone under a flickering kitchen light. I closed my eyes and saw Morgan smile, the way she hadn't asked anything from me except maybe to stay a little longer. The war inside me raged, louder than the city outside my window. I didn't text back. I powered off the phone and slipped it into the drawer beside my bed, burying it under an old sweatshirt. The next morning, I met Morgan for coffee again. Not because I needed saving, because I was learning slowly, painfully, that healing wasn't about who came back for you. It was about who stayed without needing to be asked. As I locked the bookstore behind us that evening, a soft breeze caught the edge of my jacket. I turned my face into it, breathing deep, and whispered, "Maybe this time, I'll choose who gets to call me family." The morning light stretched thin across the hardwood floor, brushing against the battered edges of the little apartment above the bookstore. I sat on the edge of my bed, the cool metal of my phone heavy in my hand, the screen still glowing with the latest message. It was Marilyn again. And Candace. Messages layered on top of each other. Apologies, promises, desperate pleas dressed up in words that felt both too heavy and too hollow. I didn't open them all. I didn't need to. Somewhere between the years and the heartbreak, I had learned to hear the words people didn't say louder than the ones they did. It wasn't regret that brought them back to me. It was need. Candace, drowning in debts she couldn't cover. Marilyn, desperate to shield herself from the shame that would ripple through the neighborhood if the truth of our broken family spilled out. It was never about love. It was never about me. I set the phone down carefully, like it might crack open and spill all that old poison back into my veins if I wasn't gentle. For a moment, the anger flared, bright, dangerous, before cooling into something quieter, something stronger. I opened a draft reply, typed 3 words, then deleted them. Some things didn't deserve answers. Some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. I leaned back, letting my gaze drift to the cracked ceiling, to the familiar hum of the bookstore awakening below me, to the life I had stitched together, scrap by precious scrap, without them. I thought of Morgan's easy smile, of Russell's quiet steadiness, of the regulars who stopped by for battered paperbacks and left pieces of kindness tucked between their pages. Family was not blood, family was not duty, family was a choice, deliberate, messy, beautiful, and I had finally chosen mine. I tucked the phone into a drawer and pulled out a slip of paper instead, folded it into a small boat the way Dad had shown me when I was little, back when there were still quiet afternoons and easy laughter in our house. On the sail, I scrawled the words I had never gotten the chance, or maybe never had the courage, to say. I forgive you, but I release you. The river was only a few blocks away, still swollen from last week's rain, its surface dark and restless. I walked there slowly, the city stirring around me, the world feeling new and old all at once. At the water's edge, I set the little paper boat down gently. It bobbed once, uncertain, before catching the current and slipping away. I watched it drift until it was no more than a speck against the wide, open sky. And then I turned my back on it. I stepped into the morning without regret, without apology, without the weight of ghosts clinging to my skin. Linked to next chapter, Lorraine quietly steps away from the riverbank, ready to rewrite her own story. Continuing the content of the previous chapter, the bookstore door creaked open with the promise of a new day, and I finally knew I belonged to myself. Sometimes the family we are born into is not the family we are meant to keep. I spent years chasing their approval, mistaking tolerance for love, and mistaking survival for living. But real healing began the day I chose myself. The day I understood that forgiveness isn't always about inviting people back into your life. Sometimes it's about setting yourself free. Maybe you've felt that too. Maybe you've stood where I stood, at the edge of being forgotten, and had to decide whether you would fight to be seen or walk away to find your own light. What does family mean to you? Have you ever had to let go of people you once thought would stand by you forever? I would love to hear your story. If this video touched your heart, drop a 1 inch in the comments or share where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with it, tell me why. Your voice matters. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next journey we'll take together.